Well, welcome everyone. As promised, I want to create a short video to help you get started with Visual Studio. Now, I'm using Visual Studio 2022, but it'll work just as well with Visual Studio 2019. So whichever one you load, it should work just absolutely fine. So what I want to do here is bring up the Visual Studio when you first go in. And when you first go in, it's probably best to use continue without code in here, although you can click on create a new project. But depending upon your settings and the things that you have going on here, you want to continue without code. And that gives you a little bit more flexibility as to what you're going to create. So I don't really need this right now. So notice I have a blank screen here, and I'm going to click on File a New and New Project. So getting back to why I recommended that you use the continue without code, it gives you the option to choose this over here and just select C++ if you have more. Notice on my version, I have all of these installed in here. So this Python will be good for you if you're taking a Python class. That way you can actually run programs directly from Visual Studio without having to download Python itself. But that's not a worry right now. So we're going to just do an empty project. And we're going to click on next. And I have my program set to the default over here, VCP. So what I'm going to do here is change it because I want to put this into our class. So I'm going to go to where our class is at on my computer. And we'll just do Spring. I'm going to put everything in here because I have more than one class, so there's no sense duplicating code. So let's create a studio directory. And I'm just going to do VSCPP. And since I'm using 2022, I'm going to put that on the end. So now we're good here. So I will click on place solution in here to make sure the project and the solution are the same as we talked about in class. And now we're set. So we now have a wonderful blank screen that tells us absolutely nothing. If you do not have a Solution Explorer open, just go to View, as soon as I find it, which is right here, and just click on Solution Explorer. So now you see it, and then you can click on it and exit it if you want. But anyway, we're going to leave it. If you click on X here, it'll exit it here. So we want it obviously on. So I'm going to right click on source files, and I'm going to click on a new item, and I will call it first. And I should have changed the project name, but I did not. So we'll leave it here and not mess with it. So let's go and click on add. So that gives me a first, hopefully I spelled it right, and we're good to go. So let's do our includes. And we're going to do a using namespace std. We are going to talk about why it's better to not do this, but in the beginning, until you get comfortable, feel free to use it, and we'll talk about fixing that later. So we need to create a main function. Notice that it's an integer, it returns an integer value. The name of the function is main. It must be called main, otherwise you'll run into a problem. Then you have an open parentheses and a close parentheses. And what I always recommend doing is putting a comment here every time there's a closed bracket so that I know where it is, and I'll just call this main. You'll see that more when we start doing loops and other functions and if statements and nested if statements. You'll see how easy it is to lose track of braces where it goes here. So we're going to create our first hello world. So we're just going to type in string, and we'll just call it hello. Or actually, let's call it message like we did in class. And I'm going to say message equals. Now notice that I have, I'll put something a little different. And notice that I put an open quote, a closed quote, and I'm assigning it to it. So what that means is, first line, create a memory location for string that's going to hold message in here. So now we're going to refer to message as that memory location. Just like when you go to Microsoft.com or mdc.edu, it goes and changes that to the IP address of where it is. Well, here, message is just another name for a memory location. And now we're just going to print it out. So we're going to test it. Now, I always recommend every time you make a change, test it. It's a lot easier to fix something if you've only made one or two changes, if something doesn't work out. So let's click on Control F5 to run it. I'm using two monitors here, so this looks out good. Hello world. So we're fine. So now let's do that thing with the sum. So we're going to create two integers. So the first one will be number 1. We'll initialize that to 0. Now, no semicolon. We're going to put a comma. Number 2. And we'll initialize that to 0. And then we'll create a sum. And we'll initialize that to 0. And notice this time I'm putting a semicolon. So we have our message displayed, and now what we're going to do is see out what is number 1. Let's go back and get rid of that lowercase because that's annoying me. So notice that I have a semicolon, or rather a question mark, and then a space. And here is my semicolon, and let's get C in number 1. So let's run this now. And now I did this on purpose. Notice these brackets here have red underneath it because the brackets are reversed. So anything that you're doing to C out, you're going to use the less than, and C in is the greater than. So this takes care of that. So let's run this, and then I'm going to make one change and show you why I don't want to use an end line here. So we have hello world, what is number 1, and we'll just call it 10. So we have some cosmetic issues. So let's do the hello world, and I'm going to do an end out. Now we will talk about making sure that, let's see, message, oh, cannot do that, sorry. The wrong thing, see out message, and then end out. It's really neat that all these red lines here tell you when something's wrong before it happens. So this should look a lot nicer. So let's run this just one more time. And what is number 1? And we'll call it 10. Everything's fine. Now let's change this and put an end out here. And let's see how that looks. And this is why you really don't want to do that. So we have what is number. Now notice it's kind of flashing here. So even though it's the same thing as far as the computer is concerned, it's really not good programming. You want to make it easier for the user. So we have that there. I'm going to copy this and just change a few things so I don't have to retype it. So we'll do what is number 2, and we'll change this to 2. And then we're going to create our sum. So sum. Now notice I skipped a space here, a blank line. The reason why I did it just makes your program a little bit more readable. I can probably get rid of this one here. And you don't want to do too many blank lines, but this is a total different block of code. So we're getting some numbers here, and now we're going to calculate the sum. Notice that I'm putting parentheses in there, and we'll just do number 1 plus number 2. Looking good there. So now we're going to type out the sum of number 1 and it will need a space here and a space there. Number 2 is so let's see what happens now. And more than likely I forgot my return. So 5 points off for me. So we want to return 0. Now we will work without the return statement, but it's not good programming in there. Remember we talked about good programs. So you always want to do the very best that you can. So let's go up here and control 5, F5, and that gives us the option here. So what is number 1? So let's do 10. And we'll do my favorite number, 17. And we should get a sum of 27. And we did. So that looks good. So if you don't like that in there, we're going to put an additional endl here. So let's take a look at what we did. We created 3 integer numbers in here. So number 1, number 2, and sum is what we call them. We initialize them to 0. So here you would put your comment. Then we're getting hello world into message, and we're just printing that, so that's no big deal. So maybe I don't want to print hello world every single time that I run this program. So what we're going to do here is we'll just comment that out. So the single line comments are the 2 slashes here. But if you need to do a multi-line comment, then you do that. Now notice as soon as I put the first slash and a star, it created the second one for me. So I need to move it down here. And now we're good to go. So now we don't have to run this every single time. Then we ask the user with a prompt, what is number 1? And then we got the number with cin. What is number 2? Then we got the number from cin. We added them together. And then we just print it out. So you can have a multi-line in here. So we have the sum of, that's literal text. And then the number 1, whatever the value in number 1 is. And then we have the word and, number 2, the word is, and finally sum in there. So let's just do one more thing just to be tricky. Not that it's really necessary, but just to show you the flexibility. So let's just do number 1 equals number 2. So now what we're doing here is we're assigning the value of whatever number 2 is into number 1. So now they'll be equal. So if I do 10 and 17, then what's going to happen is going to print out sum of 17. What 10 and 17 is 27. Then we're assigning this here. We're going to print it out again. This time, it should say the sum of 17 and 17 is 34. So let's run it and see what happens. So we'll do 10 and 17. So now we have the sum of 10 and 17 is 27, but we have the sum of 17 and 17 is 27. So we have a problem. Why do we have a problem? Well, it's very simple. What we did here, was calculate the sum after the initial getting input in here. We changed the input, but we did not calculate the sum a second time. So now the sum stays the same. So it's not going to automatically update. So what we need to do here is add that. So I try to make some mistakes when I code so that you can see if something happens, what is an easy way to fix it. And again, there's perfect example of why you want to make one change and you want to test it. So here we go. See what happens. So let's do the 10. Let's do the 17. And the sum of 10 and 17 is 27. The sum of 17 and 17 is 34. So that is it for this video. Now, I don't want you to feel discouraged if things are starting to be a little overwhelming because it is the first day. Not to worry. Things will start getting much, much, much clearer as we start doing the same things and explaining them a little bit better. So that is it for this video. Feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think. It will be available very shortly.